good evening, and welcome to Channel 5 Foreign Affairs and Further Out. I'm Anita Knapp with breaking news on the groundbreaking development of the selfish gene. According to Richard Dawkins, we are all survival machines, and the genes are the unit of evolution. This discovery comes after the development of a gene considered to be immortal, as it contains information replicated for generations. It can be inferred that the conserved genes are the best at surviving, as these genes act in a way to propagate themselves. Experts state that the individual organism is now being presented as a vessel for the self-coded information to be carried on to other generations. Therefore, gene survival is based on the altruistic behaviors in cooperation with other genes and gene carriers. These traits and behaviors presented by the survival machine are shaped by the imperative of genes to ensure their transmission to the next generation. If the organism or vessel dies off before reproducing, then the gene is unsuccessful. We'll now pass it on to Holden Minus, who is live on the scene with some of the affected individuals.
We are now here with Fruit Fly for a groundbreaking interview to shed light on how the selfish gene has been affecting their species. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, how exactly does the selfish gene work in your species?
To break it down, if you think of our genetic makeup like a recipe book, each gene has its own recipe. Some genes, such as the segregation distorter or SD gene, play by their own rules. They mess with the normal genetic transmission process to ensure that their own copies get passed on more frequently than others. It's like they're saying, hey, use my recipe more often.
That's quite the strategy. How does the SD gene manage to do that?
The segregation distorter or SD gene is quite the trickster. It interferes with the process of genetic transmission during reproduction. You see, when cells divide to form sperm or eggs, they're supposed to evenly distribute genetic material. But the SD gene throws a wrench in the works. It disrupts this process, making sure that its own copies are overrepresented in the next generation.
That is quite an interesting strategy. But how does this benefit fruit flies like yourself in the grand scheme of evolution?
You see, by favoring their own transmission, these selfish genes give individuals carrying them a competitive advantage for survival and reproduction. It's like having a secret weapon that helps us reproduce more successfully than others. Over time, this can lead to an increase in the frequency of these selfish genes within our population.
So it's basically like a genetic race?
Precisely, but it's not very smooth sailing. Sometimes these selfish genes can cause problems like male sterility or even death. However, despite these drawbacks, they persist because they offer a net benefit in terms of reproductive success.
Indeed, evolution is a complex dance of trade-offs. Thank you, fruit fly, for shedding light on how the selfish gene influences the evolutionary journey of the fruit fly.
My pleasure. Even in the smallest of creatures, evolution works its wonders.
Thank you, Holden. We've also received reports residents in a beehive recently run into emotional and political turmoil after the untimely death of their beloved queen. Unable to find an heiress in their level stock, several resident bees have expressed concerns amidst increasing agitation and unrest. However, in a stunning turn of events, a curious phenomenon has captivated the hive community: worker bees giving birth. A miracle hailed by many. Let us dive into this strange case.
I couldn't believe my compound eyes when I saw it. It's like something out of a pollen-pounding dream. This is the buzz of this century. Who knew us humble workers had such hidden talents? All worker bees are genetically predisposed to carrying genes that allow for the development of ovaries and laying eggs. Not very common, but when push comes to shove, genes have switches that can turn on or off. My colleague is an expert on the matter and can explain further.
This phenomenon can be credited to the selfish gene, which means that genes use us organisms as vehicles of their transmission. In this instance, a sequence of just 9 nucleotides near the ovary activation exon suppresses the gene expression in male workers. A simple deletion of those base pairs through alternative splicing changes the entire dynamic.
It's funny how the gene's expression influences the worker's behavior. As you can see in this case, the humble rule-following worker has suddenly changed their attitude to use the colony's resources to ensure its survival to the next generation. But it's nature's miracle and a fascinating concept for sure. We are lucky to be witnessing this in our lifetime.
Well, survival of the fittest, am I right? Congratulations to the new parents. Moving on to the next segment. The last animal up is the majestic emperor penguin. Hi there, Mr. Gunping. Thank you for joining us today.
안녕하세요. 제 이름은 펭귄입니다. The pleasure is all mine.
Could you shed light on how the selfish gene has influenced the evolutionary trajectory of your species? Would you say the actions of the selfish genes are a bit mean or disadvantageous to the population?
Not quite. It's not like the genes are making us act like this just to be mean or selfish on purpose. It's more indirect, as when you try to focus on your own well-being, it indirectly affects others around you. It's actually quite advantageous to the population, as penguins who have these genes tend to have greater fitness and can pass them down, while penguins that don't won't.
That's quite the strategy. How is this genetically encoded in you to be selfish then?
This is where most people get it wrong. For example, when penguins shove each other, it's not like there's a gene specifically for pushing. Instead, think of a group of genes linked to a penguin that makes them more aggressive, due to higher testosterone levels. Penguins with these genes might push others, passing down their aggressive traits to their kids.
That's fascinating, but how does this benefit penguins like yourself in the grand scheme of evolution?
This helps us survive better and increases our overall fitness compared to penguins without these genes. The penguins that don't push others are likely to be pushed off themselves, while the penguins that do can assess the dangers of the sea below. It's almost like our genes acting on their own, striving to optimize their transmission to future generations.
Oh, so selfish genes seem like they're the villains, but in reality, they're just trying to do what's best.
Precisely. The penguins' actions may seem selfish, but it's really about their genes trying to survive in order to better help future populations, which are acted upon by natural selection. Their actions show a delicate balance between staying alive as individuals and making sure their shared genetic traits continue.
Thank you, Mr. Peng. Through your selfish actions, you have given us a small-scale view of the bigger picture in evolution.
My pleasure.